Imagine a wall of molasses 15 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour through the streets of Boston. This is not the opening of a disaster film. This is January 15th, 1919, and what you're witnessing is one of the most bizarre industrial disasters in American history. The morning air in Boston's North End carried the familiar scent of molasses mixed with the salt breeze from the harbor. Workers hurried through the narrow streets, their breath visible in the unseasonably warm 43-degree weather. Children played in Copp's Hill Park, and longshoremen prepared for another day at the bustling waterfront. None of them could have imagined that within hours, their neighborhood would become the scene of a catastrophe so surreal that newspapers would struggle to convince readers it actually happened. To understand how 2.3 million gallons of molasses came to terrorize Boston, we must journey back to the industrial boom of the early 20th century. America was hungry for energy, and molasses was liquid gold. This thick, dark syrup wasn't just for baking cookies in grandmother's kitchen. It was the primary ingredient in manufacturing industrial alcohol, which powered everything from automobiles to munitions factories, still churning out supplies for World War I. The Purity Distilling Company had recognized this golden opportunity. In 1915, they constructed a massive storage tank on Commercial Street in the North End, right in the heart of Boston's industrial waterfront. This wasn't just any tank. Standing 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, it was an iron giant designed to hold over 2 million gallons of molasses. The structure dominated the skyline of the working-class neighborhood, casting long shadows over the tenement buildings where Italian and Irish immigrant families had made their homes. But from the very beginning, this industrial monument was flawed. The tank had been built hastily, with minimal oversight and cheaper materials than originally specified. Workers had noticed problems almost immediately. The tank leaked constantly, oozing molasses through its riveted seams like a slowly bleeding wound. Local children would collect the sweet drippings with sticks and bread crusts, turning the tank's structural failure into an impromptu candy store. The company's response to these warning signs was to paint the tank brown, hoping to camouflage the leaking molasses. This cosmetic solution masked a growing disaster. Engineers who might have caught the critical design flaws were never consulted. Safety inspections that could have prevented catastrophe were never conducted. The tank continued to groan and flex under the enormous weight of its contents, its rivets straining against forces they were never designed to withstand. As 1919 dawned, the tank held its largest load ever. A recent shipment from the Caribbean had filled it nearly to capacity with fresh molasses, still warm from its ocean voyage. The unseasonably mild January weather had caused the molasses to expand, increasing pressure on the already compromised structure. The stage was set for disaster. At approximately 12:45 in the afternoon, office workers were returning from lunch when they heard a sound unlike anything in their experience. Witnesses would later describe it as a roar, like an approaching freight train, or a massive thunderclap. Others said it sounded like machine gun fire, as hundreds of rivets began popping simultaneously. The tank didn't simply break, it exploded. 2.3 million gallons of molasses erupted from the ruptured container in a tsunami of industrial sweetness. The initial wave stood 15 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour through the narrow streets of the North End. This wasn't the slow-moving molasses of popular expression. Heated by the day's warmth and propelled by gravity and pressure, it moved with the devastating force of a flash flood. The wave struck with indiscriminate fury. A nearby firehouse was lifted from its foundation and smashed against elevated railway supports. Horses and wagons were swept away like toys in a bathtub. The elevated railway structure buckled and collapsed under the sticky assault, trapping passengers in twisted metal and molasses. 21 people lost their lives in those first terrible minutes. Martin Clowerty, a teamster, was crushed when the wave overturned his wagon. 10-year-old Antonio D'Estasio was playing in his family's tenement when the building collapsed around him. Firefighters responding to the initial emergency found themselves trapped in their own station as the structure crumbled. The injured numbered over 150. Rescue workers arrived to find victims coated head to toe in the thick, cooling molasses. The substance hardened as it cooled, creating a cement-like coating that made breathing difficult and movement nearly impossible. Rescuers had to pour hot water over victims to dissolve the molasses enough to free them. The cleanup effort was as unprecedented as the disaster itself. The molasses had spread across 2 city blocks, coating everything in a layer of sticky residue that seemed impossible to remove. Harbor water was pumped in to wash the streets, but salt water only made the molasses stickier. Finally, fresh water from the harbor and sand were used to gradually dissolve and absorb the mess. For weeks afterward, the smell of molasses hung over Boston like a sweet, cloying fog. Telephone poles remained sticky to the touch. Brown stains marked buildings at the high water line of the molasses flood. Residents tracked the residue throughout the city on their shoes and clothing, spreading the evidence of the disaster far beyond the North End. The Great Molasses Flood stands as a watershed moment in American industrial safety. It demonstrated the deadly consequences of prioritizing profit over proper engineering and safety protocols. Today, the site of the disaster is marked by a small plaque in a North End park, easily missed by tourists following the Freedom Trail to more famous historical sites.